What if you could lead more effectively and go home on time? Welcome to the Lightbulb. I'm Zoe Thompson, leadership and performance coach, and each week I bring you 3 practical insights from my work helping impact-driven leaders transform from reactive to intentional leadership so they can finish work on time and take guilt-free time off, creating success that feels as good as it looks. Let's jump in. Episode 33. It's good to be back into some kind of that normal routine, and it's nice to have the sunshine too. Back into the flow, and busy week with client work, 2 workshops to deliver, plus one-to-one sessions as well. It was actually quite hard picking out which light bulbs to focus on this week. But I have 3 for you, and looking forward to talking them through. So first one, there's never a perfect time, so stop waiting for one. The moment that sparked this was a conversation with a new client. They are going to do the Elevate Your Efficiency Blueprint program as a one-to-one client for a number of reasons, personal preference, but also just it has a slightly different setup when we do it one-to-one, and that worked better for this individual. We started the program this week with an onboarding session, same as we do with the group program. And we were talking through what did they want, what would good look like in 8 weeks' time, what were their known obstacles over the next few weeks. If there was anything that caused them some concern, anything that they wanted to talk through before we begin. And it was interesting that they were sharing that actually they were looking at starting the program a little bit before, and then certain things had come up in work. Things had changed a little bit. The landscape had changed a little bit. And then they were looking at doing it even later. But in their words, they just said it's never going to be a good time. The whole reason why they want to do the program is because things are incredibly busy. It feels very overwhelming, and they're not having time to work on the strategic level project work, the tasks that their director is asking them to do because it's so busy. And so there is never going to be a good time to do it because that's exactly the reason why they're doing it. They're always going to be busy until they make some changes, until they do things differently. And that's their whole reason for doing the program, is they want the opportunity to be able to learn some different ways of doing things and challenge some of the ways that they've always done things to be able to be more efficient and more effective so that they do have time to invest on the strategic tasks that are required for their level. So somebody had suggested pushing it into a quieter month, but is there ever going to be a quieter month? Unless you change what is happening, things are always going to be the same. It's always going to feel a certain way unless you change how you look at things. Things are always going to be very busy unless you try something different. So I loved that they said this because it just really hits the light bulb for me in that there are so many people that when I have conversations around the program running, that it's not a great time, things are really busy. Or they'll talk about wanting to do the program and then they say, it just feels really overwhelming. I can't find space for it. Like, this is exactly why you need to do the program, so that we can help you to find those spaces, so that we can talk through why you do things the way that you do and help you to look at different ways to approach your working week. That means that you are not overwhelmed, that you are not back to back, that you are not firefighting every day and being at everybody's beck and call. So I love that they said this, and I loved that they've leaned into this anyway, because that's, for me, the perfect person to do the program, whether it's one-to-one or in the group. And I know some of the people that did the last group program said exactly the same thing, that it felt very overwhelming. It felt like a lot. It really didn't feel like the right time to be adding something else into the mix. But within a couple of weeks, things were already starting to feel different. So there's never a perfect time. Stop waiting for one. Stop waiting for it to go quiet. If things need to be changed, then you need to change the things. And there's never going to be a good time. And we know from the psychology of change, that is the perfect storm that we need to create change. And sometimes it feels very overwhelming, feels like we are hitting rock bottom to force us to make that change. So we'll see what happens. And I look forward to giving some updates as to how they're getting on and what changes it's making for them. Lightbulb 2. So you wanted recognition and you got validation. Is that the same thing? And I would love to know your thoughts on this. Is it the same thing? Is validation the same as recognition? So this came up in a one-to-one session this week, and we were talking about one-to-one sessions with your line manager. I've talked about this in earlier episodes because we covered this in one of the most recent workshops, that when you get to a certain senior level, it's almost like that expectation is on you to lead your one-to-one sessions, especially when it comes down to your personal development. And that actually we need to prepare for these one-to-ones. We need to go in with the questions for the answers to get the answers that we are looking for. So it's interesting that we were talking about their one-to-one, which obviously I'm not going to share any details on because that's very confidential to them. But one of the things that they said was that they were looking for recognition. They didn't want validation. They were looking for recognition. And I asked what the difference was, because they are very similar. In my mind, they are two very different words, but I do think they're very similar. And so I wanted to understand from their perspective, what was the difference? And I would love to know what the difference is for you too. And we bounced it around and we talked it through. That then led the conversation to talk about values and how it wasn't necessarily what was being said, it was that individual's values that were out of alignment in that moment. Now we know that as humans, we need to feel significant. We need to feel like we are contributing something of value, something of worth. And we know from a staff engagement perspective, we know that we need to feel valued as individuals in terms of what we contribute, but also we need to feel that our work is valued. So it's not just what we do, it's how we do and who we are in that process, as well as needing to know where people see us going. We need to have our own plans, and most people that I work with have got a pretty good idea of their next steps and where they see progression going. But we also need to know what other people think too. And we talk about the Gallup report. I talked about this in a previous episode. Those are the three things that are really important to people. And they were three things that were clearly missing in this individual's one-to-one. And so we talked about how they can prepare for that one-to-one to make sure they can go in and perhaps ask different questions so that they get recognition. If they want recognition, they get validation if they want validation, depending on what it is that that person wants. And whilst that feedback loop is always going to look different because we've got different individuals with different approaches, knowing what it is that we want from these conversations is really important so that we can go in with our own agenda of what it is we want from that time. And if that means we need to propose an agenda to say this is what I want to discuss, or whether or not we need to ask more specific questions to get that information out of our own line manager. But that's part of the challenge. If we're very passive when we go in, then we're going to get what we're going to get. We're going to get what they give. If we can go in more prepared, if we can go in with an agenda, if we can go in with some specific questions to gather the information that we're looking for, then we are more likely to get what we need from that conversation. Now, we're dealing with individuals, so it's not in our control. It's something that we can influence, but it is something that we can influence. Can't control it, but we can influence it. And if we are more planned and we are more prepared, then we are more likely to get what we need from that conversation. And the other thing that we talked about is whether or not it needs to be that line manager to give us that recognition, to give us that validation, or whether there are other people that we can go and talk to give us that information. Might be a different perspective because it's a different person, but rather than relying on one person to give us what it is that we need, to think about where we can go and have those conversations elsewhere to gather that information. Peers that we work with, maybe stakeholders that we work with, maybe mentors or coaches in the organization that we work with that we can go and ask those questions. If we feel that we have a gap in our knowledge or in our understanding, then we can think about what information is it that we are looking for to help us to close that gap, and who can we go and ask to gather that information. So whether it's validation, whether it's recognition, whether it's simply just that feedback loop, think about what it is that you need from these conversations that you are having. Think about who you can be having these conversations with, and think about what specific questions you need to ask to get the specific answers that you are looking for. Lightbulb 3. Good work and visible work are not in competition. You can have both. I talked about this at length in our Visibility Gap workshop, which was last week. This was the monthly workshop that is created for clients that I'm working with and those that are in the leadership community. And this workshop came up as a result of these kind of conversations that were happening in community calls and in some one-to-one sessions as well. How do we increase our visibility, not just through conversations with our line managers or conversations with our peers, but how can we increase the visibility of our capability, our ability, and our potential as well? Because being good at what you do is not necessarily going to be visible. And I've talked about this in a previous episode as well. And actually, I think it was that conversation that led to this becoming the June workshop. For those of you that are in the community, if you are working with me and you weren't able to make that workshop live, go and check it out. It's a really good workshop, especially if you are looking at promotion within the next 12 months. Go and watch that workshop back. It's in the resource library. And if you're not part of the community, then you can sign up on the website. That workshop and other workshops will be all there in the resource library for you. But we talked about it in the workshop, and then days later, it came up in a client session as well. They were talking about how they had been absorbing a vacancy, how the team had been picking up extra work to absorb this staffing gap. And what they were saying is that, well, because people were getting it done, there was almost an understanding that, well, it's not an issue because it's still getting done and the ball's not been dropped. There isn't an issue. There's no problem that would indicate that this staffing vacancy is an issue. That actually the better they were getting at juggling everything else, the less anyone could even see that there was a gap that needed to be filled. And on top of that, and what's sometimes at risk, especially when leaders have vacancies on their team, and what I hear leaders say is, well, my team are already busy, so I pick up some of the slack, which is admirable. However, firstly, you're covering up what the issue actually is. And secondly, if you are covering the work of somebody from your team, you are being pulled down to work at that tactical level, which means you are probably not working on the strategic tasks that you need to have your focus, energy, and attention on. So this is really important. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should, could, or have to. Because as a leader, your role is to identify what the problems are and find solutions for them. Your role is not to necessarily go in and solve that problem yourself. But also, when there is a gap, it's not necessarily there for you to fill. It's for you to raise what that gap is, raise what the risk is, and find ways to resolve it, not necessarily resolve it yourself. but also don't do it quietly. When it goes quiet, it's no longer an issue on somebody else's radar. So it's an issue on your radar, but unless you are the person and the decision maker that is putting the solution in place, you need to be a little louder and make that problem visible as much as you are making the good work visible. So the better you are at absorbing the problem, the more invisible the problem becomes, and the less likely the solution is going to be found, because you have become the solution, and you've become the solution quietly. Sometimes we need to do good work loudly for a very good reason. 3 interesting light bulbs this week. Very different themes, but interesting all the same. And I think that's because we had the 2 workshops and I had quite a few one-to-one client sessions. So there were lots of things discussed, and actually that's what made it harder to pull the 3 out. I would love to hear what has come out as a light bulb for you, and as a result, what will you take away and do differently? Now remember, your light bulb, your next step, keep it small, keep it simple, and make it specific. Where can you apply this action in the next couple of days or in this next working week? And I would love to hear it. It's always nice to hear that people are listening to these episodes, and it's always nice to hear what they are doing as a result, because this is your opportunity to listen, learn, and try things differently. So let me know. And you heard it here first. I am in the process of now speaking to people to be guests on another season where we will still have 3 light bulbs. We will still talk about leadership, but I'm going to have some guest experts in for those conversations. So watch this space. And if you know somebody who would make a great guest, let me know or send them my way. Have a great week ahead, and I will be back very soon with the next episode. And those are your 3 takeaways for this week. Before you go, ask yourself, what's my light bulb moment from this? And now that I know what I know, what will I do differently? Choose one action, however small, and commit to it. That's how overwhelmed and reactive becomes aligned and intentional. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next week on the next episode of The Light Bulb.